Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So I was thinking about this title, which is Western Muslims and Political Activism and its ripple effects. And it actually initially took me back to a project that I worked on in a legal case many years ago. That project that was commissioned by a legal team, it required me traveling around the Muslim world asking a series of questions to a group of scholars about jihad. And the very first question that I would ask these scholars, and they were across, imagine, the whole range, the whole spectrum of Muslim ideological thought, the different schools of Shi'i thought, the different schools of Sunni thought, but the first question was always the same. Regardless of where they were in the world, I would start by saying, say for example, we're talking about Pakistan and Afghanistan, I'd say, I want you to imagine that you're standing on the Pakistan side of a border, and on the Afghanistan side, you see a man being beaten up by a foreign entity. He's just being beaten up. But there's no physical border between you. You just know that there is an invisible line that separates you on the Pakistan side with the Pakistani nationality from the person who is being abused on the other side, who is in Afghanistan of Afghan nationality. What are you supposed to do in this circumstance? Every single scholar, 100% of them, says you step across and you stop the act of abuse taking place. And it's a remarkable question because, and it's a remarkable answer because we're taught that national boundaries, they define everything about who we are in terms of legality. And that question in itself, when it's asked, and then of course the questions get deeper and deeper and deeper, and I won't go into the whole thing, but it's just that as an intellectual exercise for all these Muslim scholars who do restrict themselves by their national legislation, by the borders that have been created and constructed by colonizing forces, that when they're put into a circumstance where they're not being forced to reckon with that violent colonial structure, that the answer that they immediately give is, well, of course, why wouldn't you step over? It would be haram not to step over. You are obligated in that moment to step over and to stop that act of oppression taking place. But of course, we do live in a world where ultimately national boundaries, they dictate so much of who we are and what we're about. And so even in the title, this idea of like, okay, what does it mean to be a Western Muslim, a Muslim who either lives in the West or has been born and raised in the West? Like, what does that even mean, and why is that significant, if it's significant at all? Because ultimately, really what we're saying about that as a construct, it's not that you chose, or any of us chose to be in that situation. I didn't choose for my grandfather to come to the UK and to leave his life in Pakistan, to leave his life as a lawyer in Pakistan and come to the UK and become a grocer and to raise his kids, and then for them to raise us there. But neither did they really ultimately. If we understand that, you know, Allah's qadr operates in a way that is infinitely more complicated than anything that we could possibly define, then the positionality that we have as Muslims in any given space, in any given time, is part of our rizq. It's part of the provision that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us. It means that the location that you're in carries implications for you for that place at that time. And it's not simply the fact that there was just some great cosmic chance that you ended up in that location. It's a plan. And that's cosmologically how we are taught our faith. That this moment, this place, these resources that we've been given, they define who we are as Muslims. So the fact that there are Muslims in the West is not by virtue of any great accident. It's by virtue of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decision that we are raised in this place. And sometimes, like, you know, I do ask myself that question, like, wouldn't life be easier for me in particular, if I came out to a place like this, which ostensibly doesn't have the same degree of Islamophobia, yes, Turkey has its own problems with its own kind of political structure and its own ethno-nationalism and so on and so forth. But at the same time, I would definitely find it easier as a Muslim to not experience the kind of Islamophobia that I do face on a regular basis. And so I'm left with the question, well, if I am in the UK, or if colleagues and friends of mine are in Australia or America or wherever they are, why is it that we're there? And for what purpose? And there's something interesting about being in the colonial metropole, about being in proximity to the very structures of violence that really dominate how this world is formed, the political structures of the world, and the way in which violence is perpetuated around the world as well. And I'll be asking ourselves the question ultimately, what is my burden in relation to that? So if I come to the understanding that it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that placed me here, that this is no accident, like I think all of us, from an aqidah perspective, from the perspective of our belief, we all have that shared common understanding that it wasn't some great accident. Then what is the burden that emanates from that presence? What is the burden that emanates from knowing that your taxes go towards providing political, structural, economic, military cover to a Zionist regime that is carrying out a live stream genocide? Does that not carry implications for us as those who live so close to the structure of violence itself? And not just the structure of military violence, even when we think about, if we expand our horizon a little bit, something like free trade and neoliberalism, the fact that you go into H&M and you purchase a t-shirt for £3-4, that trade has implications that go across the world. There is a sweatshop in Bangladesh that is subsidizing your purchase. These structures of violence, they are interconnected in so many ways. And we perpetuate that through our taxes. We perpetuate that through our consumption. It is something that happens in the daily kind of maneuvering of our lives, because everything about the way in which we operate, especially in the West, benefits from trajectories of colonialism and colonial capitalism. And so that comes with burden. And some people say, and I'm going to focus a lot on Palestine because really I find it very difficult to think about anything else at this time in my life. Even though I work on Guantanamo and other cases and so on and so forth, Palestine occupies a space in my mind that is very, very hard to think outside of. I get calls from people all the time, from good, well-meaning brothers and sisters in the UK saying, Asim, why aren't you calling on our Muslim leaders to take the charge and to bring an end to what's going on in Palestine? Why aren't you calling on the Muslim armies? And here's the thing. Why would you call on your oppressor to rescue another people, right? So for the Egyptians, their oppressor is the Egyptian government. It is the Egyptian military. Who is standing at the border of Rafah taking bribes in the tens of thousands of dollars? The money that we're giving every single day towards families trying to help them flee from Gaza through Rafah, who's taking the money? It's not the Zionists who are taking that money, it's the Egyptians, right? And have we not thought through that very clearly in terms of what that relationship is and what it means? Where our money and our wealth is going and how we're using that in a way that helps, that actually helps. As Western Muslims, honestly, we give millions upon millions upon millions to Palestine every single year. The numbers are staggering. But where is that money going other than to aid, which is rotting on all the entry points trying to get into Gaza? And I'm not saying for a second that aid isn't needed. I'm saying where is the strategic thinking about what our positionality is in relation to that structure of violence, because what we end up doing, and we have to be real with ourselves, is that we subsidize the Zionist regime through the giving of aid. So every single year they attack the Palestinians. They destroy a hospital, they destroy a school, they destroy a community, whatever. And what we do is we say, hey, don't worry, we got this, we'll rebuild that school, right? It's such an abusive relationship. It is such an abusive relationship, and we still haven't figured out that actually it is a zero-sum game, because we keep on in this cycle of abusive power. The Zionists kill, they destroy, they maim, we say, don't worry, we'll pick up the tab for it. How does that make any sense? If we're very honest and real with ourselves, and we have to ask ourselves the question, has the giving of aid become a form of assuaging our own guilt because we see a live stream genocide, and the only thing that we can do that keeps us protected and safe without coming under the scrutiny of these horrible Islamophobic national security structures is to give aid and say, oh, Allah, forgive me. I'm giving aid, forgive me, because this is all I can do in this moment. And is that enough? Is that enough? And I would argue that it's not. I would argue that the giving of aid is not a relinquishing at all in any way of our responsibility towards what is happening. If the weapons are leaving the UK, then the greatest obligation is not the giving of food to Palestinians, but stopping the damn weapons that are killing the Palestinians. That is where the obligation is. What, you think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask about how many tin beans you sent to the Palestinians when there's quadcopters literally leaving our country to go and to Gaza and kill? And so I think when we talk about, being Western Muslims and activism, I think we have to fundamentally rethink the nature of our relationship to the lands that we live in, to the societies that we're part of, and what it means to obviously make these societies better than what they are as well. These are our neighbors, these are our friends, these are our colleagues, these are our allies. We have an obligation to make these societies better than they are. It's not just a case of, oh, it's just about Palestine. No, there are many, many layers of obligation. But right now, there's a live stream genocide, and it's very hard. It's very hard to think outside of the specific need. So in this period, I've been thinking a lot about the story of Nusayba bint Ka'b, Umma, who many of you will know the story of. She was one of the few female companions who fought at various ghazawat, various battles that took place. She was at least 4. And we know that her husband and her son were martyred. At Uhud, we know the Prophet ﷺ, when they were being attacked and he was under pressure, he said, whenever I looked to the left and I looked to the right, there was Umma with her sword and shield defending me with her body. So this is who she was. And she wasn't somebody who was actually a water bearer, but ended up taking up a sword and a shield. She was there as a fighter in all of these battles. Now the question is, and I think something that we have to contend with and ask ourselves, was it possible for the Prophet ﷺ at Uhud to be defended without the presence of Umma? Was it possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make sure that the Prophet ﷺ didn't lose his life without Umma's presence? Of course the answer to that is yes. We know the answer to that is yes, right? Of course it's yes. It would be ridiculous to say otherwise. So why is she there? Why is she there? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, remember, when the Prophet ﷺ is alive, right, that means that whatever is happening around him is the Sharia, right? We have to remember that. That is how we understand our faith, that whatever is happening, and if something is happening and Allah does not correct that thing directly, it means that is Sharia. It means it is what Allah permits. So why is nobody accusing this woman of free mixing? Right, which is the common accusation when women get involved in things that they're told they're not permitted to, right? Why is this accusation not being leveled at her? Why is she allowed and permitted and required to be at other battles? And it wasn't just her, by the way. There are at least 4 other sahabiyat who engage in the various ghazawat as fighters. And the point that I'm trying to drive home here is that this moment is about capability and capacity. You do not take away our capability and our capacity just because of your own notions of some traditional old school world that you want to recreate. There is a live stream genocide taking place. I think it would be a foolish person, genuinely a foolish person, who would say that a Muslim woman with a university education who's got considerable amounts of rizq, that she does not have a greater burden to bear in relation to Palestine than the vast majority of Muslim men in this ummah who come from countries like Indonesia or Yemen or Somalia or Afghanistan or Pakistan. Are you genuinely telling me that a Muslim woman with a Western education who has studied international relations doesn't have more of an obligation than a fisherman off the coast of Somalia whose entire problem in life is whether or not he's going to catch fish that day? Are we actually going to say that? And I think that only a foolish person would say that, really. And so the question is, what is our obligation for those of us who have rizq, who have more rizq? And I think that is the burden. We talk about how we might leverage our positions from the West, but we don't talk about what the burden is of living in the West, of living close to power, of living close to the structures and the systems of violence. Because I believe that when the shuhada are raised on Yawm al-Qiyamah, when Ahl Gaza are raised on Yawm al-Qiyamah and they start pointing fingers, it is those of us who live closest to the systems and structures that keep Zionism in place that will first be accounted for what's gone on. If the weapons and the money is leaving the US and the UK, what, you think that some poor Egyptian farmer is going to be asked about Gaza like we will? I don't think so. And I don't think that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy operates. And I also don't think that's how His punishment operates either. And so we have to reconfigure how we think about what Allah has given us and the position that we're in. Maybe you're an artist. How are you using your art in order to raise awareness? Maybe you're a comedian and you have a certain skill set. Perhaps you should be using that for this cause in whatever way that you can. The context that we're in defines so much about who we are as Muslims in the everyday. And it defines what our relationship is, not only to the world around us, but actually ultimately our relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so I think that's the question we want to come away with. What is my role? What is my individual role in this? And you know, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, and all of you know it, but it's just worth repeating. The Prophet ﷺ told us that if you see a munkar, if you see an evil, then you change it with your hand. And if you are incapable of changing with your hand, then you speak against it with your tongue. And if you're incapable of that, then at least, at the bare minimum, hate this thing in your heart. At least just maintain that through dua and whatever you can. But the thing is that we can do a lot. Boycotts are effective. We should be boycotting anything and everything that we possibly can. Because what we have to understand is that what maintains Zionism as a structure is all of the oxygen and the supply lines it gets from around the world. And like with apartheid South Africa, what we have to do is cut off those supply lines as much as possible in the most effective ways. And boycotting is an effective way. We know that because we know that Netanyahu for a very long time, and many people within Israel have been talking about how their bottom line has been affected by boycotts. But there's a spiritual element to boycotting as well. Now what if it didn't work? What if it didn't work? and this is where the lowest form of Iman comes in, that even at the level of fine, it doesn't work, but you yourself know that this purchase goes towards a system and a structure of violence, then just that spiritual element of your heart being connected to the people should be enough for you. It should be enough for all of us, that spiritually we're connected to the idea that our consumption is harmful in this world. And that's not just with Palestine, it's with the entirety of neoliberalism as a model, or as a model that exploits the vulnerable every single day. We've seen since Hinds Hall at Columbia, and I very much recommend that people watch the new documentary, The Encampments. It's very, very, very beautiful. It really warms your heart to see young people really leading the charge and acting bravely and showing us, those of us who are older activists even, what bravery looks like in the 21st century. Encampments, we should be out there supporting them in whatever way we can. If you're a student yourself, why are you not at an encampment, especially if you live in the West? And if you're not, what are you doing to support the encampments? These young people need our support as much as possible. We can do legal applications. Alhamdulillah, I was very blessed to be involved with the application to try and have Hamas removed from the list of terrorist organizations in the UK. It's funny because everybody was telling us that this is like really, really, really difficult. This is why are you guys doing this stuff? You're going to put a target on your back for doing this. And the response has to be that, well, for a start, the law itself allows us to do this. But secondly, with all of our legal training, if we're not going to do the things that law allows, then what was the point of our entire training in the first place? What is the point unless we're pushing the boundaries of what is acceptable? What Muhammad Kurd calls raising the ceiling of what is permissible. We have to raise that ceiling all the time, because if we allow our fears to dictate and dominate what it means to be an activist in this world, then we've already lost, because the system and the structure of violence has already put us in our box and told us this is the only place of protest that you can exist in, the place that we permit you to be, because it doesn't damage our hegemony in any way. But of course, my biggest call really is that we support direct action. Right now, there is no group, and may Allah protect them, because the British Home Secretary is about to try and put them on the list of prescribed terrorist organizations. But Palestine Action are doing what? They are the ones smashing up the drones that are going to kill the Palestinians in Gaza. When you think about what's being built right now in the UK, quadcopter. For those of you who don't know what a quadcopter is, it's a machine like a drone. But what it does is that it flies around Gaza in periods of relative stability, and it emits the sounds of women and children screaming. And the purpose of this machine is to lure adults out into the open, and it has a machine gun attached. So when they come out looking for these screaming people, it shoots them down. You can Google this yourself. You should find it on YouTube. See what the quadcopters are doing in Gaza. That's exactly its purpose. And what are Palestine Action doing? They're climbing the roofs of the factories that are making these machines, lowering themselves in and smashing the drones up, smashing the quadcopters up. This is the highest form of that hadith, of doing something with your hand. They are literally saving lives by destroying this machinery. And so our obligation at the most minimum level is to support the political prisoners who are being detained because of these actions that they're taking, to support their families, to write letters to these prisoners, but then of course to get involved in Palestine Action if we can, in whatever capacity you can, and of course to actually take part in an action if you're able to do so. And of course, finally, for those people who are constantly saying, we need to get the Muslim armies on board. It's not the case of just the Muslim armies. We ultimately, at some point, have to resurrect a tradition, a noble version and tradition of jihad at some point. And the reason for that is because, for a start, it's part of our tradition. You know, this is not a pacifist religion. It is a religion about justice. You know, in the Quran, when it speaks about dispossession, dispossession, when it takes place, it doesn't require a scholar or an imam to say that you are able to take back what is dispossessed. The Quran is very explicit. Look at Surah Hajj, Surah Baqarah, Surah Shura. It's very clear that you fight in order to recover what has been lost, but you do not become an aggressor yourself. This is the tradition in Islam. But we have to change our societies. It is no good going to Jordan and Egypt and saying, you guys need to do something, because these are oppressive states. The jailers of Palestine are not the Zionists. The jailers of Palestine are Jordan and Egypt. You know, I come from a background where, you know, people who are in an age group just older than me, they fought in Bosnia, they fought in Chechnya, they fought in Afghanistan, and they came back and they became doctors and lawyers and teachers and everything else. They lived very, very normal lives, but they played their role when it was required of them to do so. They did it everywhere in the Muslim world except for one location, which was Palestine. There's never been a consistent foreign fighters movement to enter Palestine. And the reason for that is because of the role that Jordan and Egypt play. These are the jailers of the Palestinians, because otherwise we know what our people are like. There would be planes landing in to Amman or to Cairo from South Africa, from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from Pakistan, from Yemen, you name it. There would be a plane flying in with people who would want to liberate these people. And it has to be done right, and it has to be done correctly, because our tradition does not allow us to be oppressors either. But this is part of the landscape of what is required. And ultimately, you know, really what it comes down to is that we have to change the nature of our relationships with our own states. You know, the role that we play inside the West is one thing. We have an obligation in the West in order to stop the machinery of violence affecting the Palestinians and generally the Muslim world. But, you know, for those people who live in these Muslim countries, these countries have to change as well, because justice is not possible while this system of dictatorship and ethno-nationalism and bordering remains in the way that it is. And it requires a profound change in the world for us to achieve that, inshallah. So I'm going to stop there and give Sister Lauren, inshallah, some time to share some words with us as well. Jazakumullah khair.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Big thank you to Brother Asim, who has been a kind of a distant mentor to me since I first came to Islam 15 years ago. And you know, those profound words which we will inshallah have a Q&A and delve into more deeply. I'm going to kick off today talking about fear. I'm going to talk a little bit, inshallah, I will share what happened in Egypt recently and perhaps where we're going and our thought processes jumping off from some of the ideas that Brother Asim gave. Let's talk about fear. We're all afraid. This is a fearful time. Things are changing and they're changing fast. The time before, when everything seemed easy and we could get, you know, relaxed off the land and make our 10-year plan, doesn't seem so possible now. We may not be in Gaza, but we're certainly, you know, not in the land of Oz anymore. We've been awakened and shaken, whether it's by, you know, 3 years ago with the huge earthquake down in the south of Turkey. I was in an earthquake recently here. When you feel the land beneath your feet going. I remember I started by saying, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah. And then when I realized it wasn't stopping and I might die, I went, Astaghfirullah, Astaghfirullah, Astaghfirullah. We're in the realm of Astaghfirullah now, aren't we? So I want to talk a little bit about fear, because when Brother Asim and I first met, I was new to Islam, but I'd come from an activist background, which meant I had a huge amount of privilege. I was a British journalist, so at that point untouchable. People knew my name, bit of untouchability, and then I came to Islam and I tried to make the same arguments I'd made the day before, but with a scarf on my head. And so Brother Asim and Marazim approached me and said, will you come on board in some form to support Cage, new NGO doing brilliant work for what was clearly to me, as a non-Muslim who had just come to Islam, clearly acts of state violence against innocent people, called the War on Terror. I said, yeah, absolutely, no problem. This is where it's at. Within 4 months, I backed off. It's actually, Allah knows best. Maybe I've done lots of acts of cowardice, but this one is one that I want you to know it burns me to this day. Wallahi, I'm sorry. It burned me. They put me on the front page of the newspapers that I'd been writing for 6 months earlier as a cheerleader for ISIS. Do try and get a job after that. I wouldn't have employed me. I was a single mum with 2 kids and a convert to Islam who was now being called a terrorist, and it was really hard, and I backed off. And I learned a really valuable lesson. Do you think the pressure from the mainstream stopped one iota? Because I said I'm no longer associated or affiliated with Cage? Or do you think it's still mounted? Because the arguments you made still exist. And unless you take those back as well, are you still for Palestine? Well, of course I'm still for Palestine. Are you still attending dinners for families where the husband's been put into prison without real charges? Yes, I'm against them. Then the things that Cage stood for, I'm still for. So they kept coming and coming. So that was a really big lesson. I had to face fear again just a month ago. Going to Egypt as part of the global march to Gaza, the global march to Gaza, really challenged me. Right? I'm a little bit older than I was, still feisty, but am I actually ready to go to Rafah? My heart said yes, but my nafs were going, yeah. And when my daughter was saying to me, you're old now, Mum. You know, you're nearly 60, you can calm down. Nobody's expecting you to go. Shaitan was having a dance party. Yeah, that's your way out. We all have these waswas that weaken us and make us afraid, and we need to look it in the face. And that's why the week before it was happening, I spoke to my husband and I booked my flight and I said, hell to the no, because we have to stand up. This is an age when we're going to be asked to do extraordinary and brave things to whatever level we're able. And Brother Asim made the point brilliantly. I had to look in the mirror and go, I try not to look too much in the mirror, that's just a saying, but look in the spiritual mirror and go, have you got good health? Yes. Can you afford the flights and the hotels? Yes. You better, do you care about Gaza? It's killing us inside. We can't watch another, Squid Game death by starvation. Then get on the flight. And I want each of us here to think within what we're capable of doing. What does it mean, that phrase, get on the flight, for our brothers and sisters? What does it mean to you, get on the flight? What is your internal struggle? But as a Muslim woman, I want to raise this as well. We should do our due diligence. So, for example, number 1, I had to speak to my husband. Promising not to risk too much. Now I'm married to you. Do you mind if I go to Gaza and maybe get shot at or detained? Really tough. I think it was harder on him than it was on me. He said, go. I don't want you to go, but you have my permission to go, and I won't stop you going, and I will hate every single second, and it will kill me inside, and you have to go and go. So we do our due diligence. So then I went to various ustadha and sheikhs, and I said, should I go? Was I looking for a way out? You decide. I hope I wasn't fatwa shopping. But I think it's very important that we learn about how to ask and who to ask. And I went to Dalia Ayub, anybody who knows her. I said, sister, doing my due diligence. As a woman, is it okay for me to go on this? I'm going to be going on my own. I know it can be rough in Egypt. I've had some experience with the secret services there before. She said, Ukhti Lauren, it's wajib on you. Whoa, that's not a light statement. If it's not wajib on you, who is it wajib on? When we make these statements online, everybody stand up for Gaza, and then we go in and get a McDonald's. Ooh, hypocrisy. Astaghfirullah. Everything is accountable for before Allah Ta'ala. It's wajib on us to be truthful to our words and take these actions. So then, let's talk about what actually happened in Egypt. So the plan was that 4,000 people converse in Cairo, land in Cairo, go to a checkpoint and meet, and then begin going towards a place called Al Arish. So I'm going to draw a little map, it's going to be really technical. Here's Cairo, here's Al Arish, here's Gaza. So we had to get from there to there, possibly by coaches, camp 5 days in the near the Gaza, near Rafah, and then be around Rafah for 4 or 5 days. These are not easy asks. But if we believe we're towards the end of times, and honestly every day is a day closer to the end of times, doesn't matter if it's 500,000 years, it's true to say we're closer to the end of times than we were yesterday, right? Then we're going to have to make big decisions in the right way, inshallah. So we land. Some people were stopped, by the way, in Istanbul. When I went to catch the plane from Istanbul, this threw me. This was very interesting. I went to check in at Nile Air, and they said, we're not taking any foreign passports today. And the brother who was there, Muslim guy, Turkish obviously, he said to me, listen, come here. He said, this is new. This isn't Egypt. This is the Zionists. And I'm like, but they're telling you in Turkey. He said, yeah, but it's Nile Air, so it's Egyptian. 85 Turkish protesters had been taken off a flight the day before in Turkey. Where is the front line of Zionism? Where does it stop? 85 didn't even get on a plane in Turkey. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. However, when I got there, it was repealed. Presumably, some background action, some diplomatic action. So I make it to Cairo, and the next day I head off with a sister from Egypt, and I say, let's just grab a taxi off the street, because we're starting to hear on our chats people being grabbed off the street by the secret police. So I say, let's be smart, let's just go and grab a taxi, not wait for it in the foyer. We're approached by 2 men in t-shirts, young guys, give us your passport. No, not going to happen. Tell me who you are, show me who you are, I'm just a tourist. Then comes the guy in the army uniform, and suddenly we find ourselves in a back street, surrounded by around 40 young Egyptian men who could be going to a football match but were actually working with the secret police. That's how they make their money. And around me were people from around the world, and I want us to be inspired by this. It was inspiring. There was Pierre over here, 65 years old, finished chemotherapy 2 weeks ago. I said, how are you doing? He said, I'm all right, but they won't give me cold water, and with my medicine, I really need cold water. So I go up to these, nasty scum of the dregs of the earth, or people in a bad condition. If I'm going to put it in try to hold my tongue a little bit. People in a bad condition who make their money out of oppressing others, who make that decision every day. Can you give him some cold water? No. There was an old lady from Malaysia. Again, we're talking about who has fear and who doesn't. Who is chosen by Allah and who is left on the sidelines. You see, we're already on the sidelines. We're already the B, C, D team, because the A team are in Gaza. Make no mistake, the A team are in the West Bank. You and I, we're subs. At the best, if we get called up, we're subs. So anyway, so there's the Malaysian lady, there's a pregnant lady, she's from Turkey, she's there with her husband, she was told by all her family it's haram for you to go, you're a woman. She asked me, is it haram? I said, well, some sisters and some sheikhs say it's actually wajib. And by the way, when you speak to your husbands and your male family members, remind them, the global committee of the Committee of Global Ulama have said that it's now wajib to do jihad on behalf of Palestine. Anybody know about this fatwa? Anyone? Oh, you will.
Yes.
Yeah? So who's doing, so what are you doing?
Not so sure.
Just what? Astaghfirullah. But we have to do it wisely. We have to be active. Activism means being active. Long story short, we all got rounded up. The group I was with got put in a boiling hot prison van. I argued quite strongly with the Egyptians, trying to get things moving. When we get to the airport, we're faced by around 60 armed police in riot gear. And this is what really hurt me. When you're talking about, Brother Asim, you're talking about, there's no point asking Egypt to do their bit. Spot on. These young kids wearing black with their big shields and their batons drawn at me, an old lady, that nearly broke me. That was as great a pain as anything I've seen coming out of Gaza. I said to these young men, I said, what are you doing? Why am I and Pierre and Joanne and Chloe from Ireland, why are we having to go to Rafah? You're here. You do it. Don't beat up old people. I'm telling you now, some of them had tears in their eyes. Some of those young men just drop their heads like this because they know. And that's what living in a police state means. Jordan looks nicey from the outside. Let's all go to Amman. It's a police state. Egypt, let's go to Sharm el-Sheikh, spend all our money, let's go see the pyramids. Oh yeah, it's going to be so cool. I love going to Egypt, police state. That's the reality. But we have a job to do. So I want us all to put that fear to the back, have tawakkul in Allah, and take the action that's needed, inshallah ta'ala. I'll make one more point. I want to talk about what's coming up and what you can be involved in, what you may not know. There are 3 main groups right now pushing the pressure on the Egyptian borders and on the siege of Gaza. There's the Samud convoy, the land convoy which set out from Algeria and Tunisia towards Gaza. They're gathering right now in Tunis. Find out about them. The global march to Gaza hasn't stopped. Thousands of people will be finding other activities to do. Find out about it, inshallah. And of course, the Freedom Flotilla. And when we are told, and there are lots of these odd bods online, I have Instagram and I have a YouTube channel, and there's always one or two who are like, well, you failed, didn't you? You didn't do anything, did you? I'm in Egypt, we were laughing at you. Astaghfirullah. Did we fail? 1,000 ships are now being talked about and prepared, inshallah, in Malaysia. You send 2 ships to challenge the Israeli siege, it's our problem. You send 1,000, it's Israel's problem. You have 7,000 people talking about going to a border, it's kind of our problem. You get 500,000 people signing up, putting pressure on each of their governments. Showing up becomes the government's problem. So I just want to end there and say we all have something to do. Put fear aside. Alhamdulillah, have tawakkul in Allah. And all will be well, all khair, inshallah. And the people of Palestine, you know, they're the winners. They're the winners. Alhamdulillah, barakallah feek. Maybe I can ask you a question, brother. So if there's one thing that, let's say, a student could do right now who's based in Istanbul, what could they do?
Oh, you really want to ask me that question?
I know.
That's not really a great question to ask me.
Okay, no. All right, well, what would you, all right, let's take Istanbul out of it.
I don't want to
because remember, by the way, what we're talking about is all legal things. We're talking about legal things. So you said the boycott.
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
what are the next moves?
I mean, look, I think what I would emphasize, again, without getting anybody into trouble for being in this location in particular, is that I think sometimes we think prescriptively about these things. I think that's a general principle. Like, people want to be told what to do, but I think the most effective thing to always do is to pivot from what you're good at and what your skill set is. And that is where the burden comes from, actually. I think that's the thing that we're not thinking about enough, which is, okay, there are certain things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me an ability to do that He didn't give to someone else. Maybe you're great at coding, maybe you're a hacker, maybe you are a great artist, a poet. You know, here's the thing, right? At the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the Quran, we would say the Quran was enough for the Sahaba, right? The Quran's enough. Like, what do you need after the Quran and being in the Prophet ﷺ's presence? And yet still the Prophet ﷺ ordered or requested some of the Sahaba to write poetry, to pen poetry, in order to raise the spirits of the other Sahaba. Well, the Quran wasn't enough? Like, it's a serious question. Was the Quran not enough for all of them to solidify their hearts and to increase them? But the Prophet knew that poetry is a skill, and you are obliged to use that skill when you have that skill to good effect. You can't walk away from it. If you are an artist, you can't just walk away from that art because you don't feel like it. And this is the thing about reconfiguring our relationship to what skill set you have. Maybe you're a brilliant orator, right? Like Suhail ibn Amr, right? Brilliant orator. He's required to use that oratory for a purpose. There are things that we can all do that are based on the rizq that we're given. And rizq is burden. People think of it as just pure benefit, and just to be thankful for it. Allah, you gave me this much money, I'm so thankful to you. That's great. Of course, thankfulness is connected to rizq, but rizq is connected to burden as well. If you have that much money and you're not spending it in the path of Allah in different ways, then it is something that could be sinful for you, something that is punishable. But because we have relegated the category of rizq to what we monetarily have, and we don't connect it to the state of our health, to the state of our intellect. Like, if you have multiple degrees of education and you don't acknowledge that this is a rizq from Allah and therefore carries a burden, then you've fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the relationship you have to that provision. Because none of us are so brilliant that we were able to conceive of all of these things ourselves. We believe that all of this was inspired by Allah. If you have those things, then it was from Allah's inspiration. And so that all that's left then is us individually asking ourselves, what is my role in this moment, in this place, in this time? And yeah, I think that's really what you have to pivot from.
I wonder what you've done about fear. You know, some people here have to go back to the UK. Is it approaching police state as a very big American, phrase? But has it changed? I mean, we talked about Schedule 7. That's 10 years old now.
I think fear is okay. I was joking with somebody about this the other day. Where would we place Musa alayhi salam in like the categories of like strongmen of this ummah? He's like top 5, top 3, right? That's how we'd categorize him. He's like a strong prophet. It's how he's been described. Someone strong enough to kill a man with a single slap, right? When Allah gives him the message about becoming a prophet, of being now under a duty to free the children of Israel from Pharaoh's oppression, his first response in Surah Taha is what? I'm afraid of what Pharaoh and his people will do to me. His first response is a fear response, and vocalizing to Allah, who's literally just revealed himself as the Lord of the worlds to this guy, right? And his first instinct is say, I'm afraid of what's going to happen to me. And I think a fair response is okay. Fair response is what keeps us alive. But when the fear becomes debilitating to the extent that we also don't recognize Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power over everything that exists in the universe. Like we say, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah after every salah for a reason, reminding ourselves that quwwah, that strength, that power, that authority, that nothing is greater than Allah. And that is what is supposed to reframe the fear into something that is manageable for you as a Muslim, because you know, as Allah has told us in the Quran, that if the entire forces of this world were to conspire to harm you, then nothing can touch you except by Allah's permission. So therefore, the recalibration is this, that if harm touches you, it's only because Allah permitted it, and not for any other reason. And that's why we don't get into this despondency of action. We don't fear to the extent that it debilitates us, because we know that the result of the actions that we do, providing they're well thought through, providing that they're in accordance to the Sharia and so on and so forth, that righteousness will never be rewarded with ill except by Allah's permission, that harm should come to you. And then even then, that is from Allah. Last year I was very honored to publish a book with Dr. Wala Quwaisi, about the experiences of Muslim political prisoners in Egypt and the US. And consistently what you hear from Muslim political prisoners is the same thing, which is we lost our fear inside prison because we were just free to worship Allah completely. And it's such a remarkable thing to reflect on, that it's actually those of us who are on the outside who are caged, because the dunya is always there, and we're always worried about this, we're worried about that, we're worried about the other. But bravery is a praxis. Bravery is not theoretical. Bravery is something that you have to practice in your everyday life. Otherwise, it's meaningless.
Do you know, I remember asking Brother Moazim once, what on earth do you remember about Bagram? And he smiled. I'm like, why would you smile about something like Bagram? He said, I memorized, that's where I became Hafiz of Surah Baqarah.
That's right.
Allahu Akbar. That he took away sweetness from one of the worst torture cells that America had put in place for the Muslims, because Allah allowed it to be the place that he became Hafiz of Surah Baqarah.